Some winters never ended. Not in memory, not in bone. They clung like ghosts to the ribs of the land, howling across canyons and through pine until even time seemed to freeze beneath the snow. This was such a winter. Ayoka pressed her back against the cold rock, her arms wrapped tightly around the small, shivering form of her son. The wind outside the abandoned trapper's shelter groaned like some wounded animal, clawing at the cracks in the timbers. Snow filtered in like dust from a ruined ceiling. She'd stuffed what fur she could find into the holes, but it made little difference. Her breath steamed the air, but Tayan's didn't. Not anymore. He lay against her, still and too quiet, wrapped in the tattered remains of his father's hunting coat. She dared not sleep. For 3 days they had not eaten. The traps had caught nothing but frost, and the stream had frozen so thick she couldn't even break it with stone. Tayan's cheeks were sunken, his lips cracked, and his dark eyes, once so filled with mischief, stared blankly at the splintered floorboards. When he spoke, it was in whispers, and he no longer asked for food. Ayoka had learned long ago how to carry pain without showing it. Her father taught her that when she was barely older than Tayan, when the Union Army had marched through their lands, offering steel in one hand and treaties in the other, she had survived a war, marriage to a trapper who'd left behind more debts than meat, and the quiet, cold death that had taken him when a rival band stole their stores last fall. But now, with her son's life slipping into silence, her strength teetered. She stood slowly, teeth clenched against the dizzy pull of hunger. Her legs were stiff as deadwood. Reaching into a worn satchel, she retrieved the last of their kindling, a few broken pine needles, a strip of birch bark, and set it beneath the half-burnt log in the iron stove. A match flared weakly to life, sputtered, then caught. For a moment, a soft glow bloomed in the darkness. Tayan turned his face toward the warmth. "Mama," he said, lips barely moving, "is the fire enough tonight?" She knelt beside him, brushing a hand through his coarse black hair. "It will be. You rest now." He tried to nod, but only closed his eyes. A tear slipped from the corner, freezing before it reached his chin. Outside, the wind wailed louder, and something inside her cracked. She stood again, this time with purpose. She would not watch him die. The decision came not as thought, but as instinct, old as the blood in her veins. Wrapping herself in a wool cloak stiff with age, she took the snowshoes from the hook near the door, strapped them over cracked moccasins, and lifted her father's old hunting knife from the shelf. With one last glance at her sleeping son, she pulled the door open and stepped into the storm. The world beyond had turned white and formless. Snow curled around her like smoke, hiding the path, hiding everything. But she remembered. Somewhere to the west, beyond the ridge and a dry creek, lay Black Ridge Ranch. She had passed it once in autumn, when her husband still lived, and there had been corn to trade. The man who owned it was said to be half-mad, a war veteran who didn't speak to anyone and shot at most who came near. But he had a barn, livestock, perhaps even bread. She had no more choices left. Each step through the drifts tore at her limbs. The snowshoes helped, but the wind pushed sideways, and the cold crept in under the hem of her cloak. Ice tugged at her lashes, and more than once she stumbled into blind pits, scraping knees on buried roots. But she pushed on, driven by the image of Tayan's sunken face. She moved without time, without thought, only direction. The trees grew sparse, replaced by brittle scrub and long shadows. The snow lessened for a moment, revealing a break in the hills, Black Ridge. The ranch sat at the edge of a bluff, half swallowed by winter. A rough fenced pasture lay empty beneath the white, the barn's roof sagging with snow. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney, thin but real. Light flickered inside. Her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees in the snow, gasping. The world tilted. A wave of nausea struck, and for a moment she forgot where she was, why she was there. Then she heard it, the low growl of a dog. From the side of the barn, a dark shape emerged, a massive wolfhound, ears perked, fur bristling with ice. It stood still, watching her. Behind it came the sound of boots, deliberate and slow. She raised a trembling hand. "Please," she whispered, though her lips were cracked and bleeding. "My boy, he's dying." The man who stepped into view was broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark coat, that flapped in the wind like a war banner. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but his eyes were sharp. His right leg moved stiffly, dragging slightly with each step. In one hand, he held a rifle, not raised, but not lowered either. He said nothing. She tried to rise, but her legs refused. The wind shrieked again, and her vision went white around the edges. "Don't shoot," she managed, voice breaking. "I have nothing to take. Only mercy." The snow swallowed her as she fell forward, arms outstretched. The last thing she saw was the shadowed shape of the man stepping closer, the dog circling around her with cautious steps, and the orange flicker of firelight dancing in the snow behind him. Then darkness, but not the kind that ends, the kind that waits. The dog was the first to reach her. Boone, a wolfhound the color of ash, padded through the snow with cautious grace, nose low, breath steaming. He circled the collapsed woman once, twice, then let out a short bark that wasn't alarmed, just alert. It carried through the white silence like a warning bell. Lorne McAllister came a moment later, rifle still in hand, though he lowered it as he approached. He'd seen enough men and women collapse in snow to know the difference between a threat and a dying soul. She was frozen nearly through, her lips tinged blue, a knife clutched in one numb hand. Her body shook violently, then not at all. Lorne crouched beside her, grunting at the tightness in his stiff leg. A long scar ran down the side of it, hidden beneath layers of wool and leather, ending in a hinge that clicked with each motion. The child's name was the first word she muttered. "Tan," she whispered, barely audible. "Please." Lorne exhaled slowly through his nose, gaze sharpening. He didn't know her. Not many people came out this far, but her face bore the strong cheekbones and dark eyes of the Mohawk. And she was no beggar by choice. The knife in her hand had been gripped to the end. With practiced ease, he hoisted her over his shoulder. She was lighter than he expected. Starvation made people light. Inside the cabin, warmth and the scent of oak logs filled the air. Boone trotted in ahead, circling back toward the hearth as Lorne laid the woman gently on the floor near the stove. He covered her in the buffalo hide from the cot and stoked the fire higher until it snapped and spat hot sparks. Only then did he notice the child wasn't with her. The thought hit like a hammer. He checked the doorway, half expecting another shape in the snow. But there was only wind and white. He stared out for a long minute, jaw clenched. She hadn't come for herself. Lorne turned, threw on his coat, and took up the lantern from the hook. "Boone," he said simply. The dog lifted his head, ears alert. "Find." The trapper's shelter hadn't been lived in for years, but someone had patched the holes well enough to hold back the storm. Lorne kicked the door in with one heavy boot, scanning the shadows with his lantern raised. Boone darted ahead, nose twitching, then whined. In the corner lay the boy, no more than 8, wrapped in a heavy coat far too large for him, face pale and still. For a second, Lorne feared he'd come too late, but the boy moved, just barely, a slow exhale leaving his lips. "Got you," Lorne muttered. He knelt, wrapped the boy in his own coat, then carried him out into the night. Back at the cabin, the woman was stirring, her eyes opened halfway, struggling to make sense of the ceiling overhead. Lorne didn't speak. He settled the child beside her, added more wood to the fire, and poured a ladle of broth from the simmering pot into a tin cup. "Drink it slow," he said. "Don't try to talk yet." She didn't answer, only pulled the boy into her arms and pressed her lips to his forehead. Relief hit her like a wave, pure, wordless. Lorne watched them both a long moment before turning away, setting the rifle by the door. The wind had started to die, and the worst of the blizzard had passed. But something deeper churned behind his calm expression. He poured a second cup of broth and sat in the chair nearest the window. Boone curled at his feet. The silence stretched, broken only by the pop of the fire and the woman's quiet breaths. "You're lucky," he said finally. "Few folks wander this way and live to tell it." Her voice came hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Didn't mean to wander." "No, I reckon not." She sat up slowly, wincing as feeling returned to her limbs. The boy remained asleep, wrapped tightly in the hides. Her eyes moved over the room, the weapons hanging neatly on the wall, the rows of canned preserves on open shelves, the carved wooden cross above the hearth. "I thought you might shoot me." Lauren didn't look at her. "I still might, if your story's bad enough." She studied him, brow furrowing. "You're a hard man." He sipped his broth. "I'm a man who's seen enough to stop pretending kindness is free." She didn't argue. Instead, she adjusted the hide over Tayan and leaned back against the wall. "My name is Ayoka." He nodded. "Lorne." The dog thumped his tail at the sound. Silence again, though this time not so heavy. She watched him, his lined face and graying beard, the stiffness in his movements. He wasn't young, but there was strength still in his shoulders, and the way he sat with his rifle always within reach told her he hadn't retired from violence entirely. "You live alone?" "I do." "No family?" Lauren's jaw flexed. "Used to." She didn't press. Ayoka's voice was steadier when she spoke again. "There's no food left in the shelter. I thought if I could reach someone." "You reached someone," Lauren said. "Question is, what now?" She looked down. "Now I wait for you to decide." That earned a bitter smile. "I'm not your judge, and I didn't haul you in from the storm to bury you. You'll stay here till the boy's strong enough to move. Then we go. If you want, though I doubt you'll find better shelter before the thaw." Ayoka was quiet. Her eyes moved to the window, where the wind still curled snow across the glass. Lauren stood and crossed to a cabinet, unlocking it with a small iron key. From within, he withdrew a flask, a battered journal, and a metal tin. He set the flask aside, opened the tin, and withdrew a piece of dried venison, which he broke in half and handed to her. She accepted it, chewing slowly. Her body trembled for more than just cold. He returned to his chair and opened the journal, eyes scanning the page without reading. His thoughts drifted. He hadn't seen a child in years, not since the mines took his boy, and he'd buried his wife long before that, before the war even. Since then, it had been cattle, the land in Boone. But this woman hadn't begged. She hadn't knelt or cried or pleaded for his mercy. She dragged herself through a storm with a knife in one hand and her child's name in her mouth. That sort of grit he understood. And something else, when she said Tayan. There was a familiarity to it. Not just love. Fear. A fear he'd once known when a Confederate bullet tore through his boy's side and the bleeding wouldn't stop. The helplessness of it. The rage. He closed the journal without writing a word. Outside, the storm had passed, but the quiet that followed was not peace. It was the silence before movement, before change. He could feel it like a storm yet to break. "Rest," he said to her. She nodded, eyes already closing again. The boy curled against her. Lauren stared at the fire, and his hand drifted to the rifle once more. Something told him this winter wasn't done yet, and whatever had brought Ayoka to his door might not be far behind. They came without warning. No howling wind, no distant hoofbeats, just the dull thud of boots packing down snow. Lauren knew the sound. He rose from the table, rifle already in hand, Boone by his side, ears perked. Ayoka stood from the cot slowly, cradling Tayan, who had just begun to regain his strength. The boy stirred, sensing something his half-healed body couldn't name. Lauren motioned silently toward the back room. "Take him. Stay quiet." She didn't argue. Her instincts aligned with his. Whatever was coming wasn't here to talk. The first knock on the door was too polite. "Ho there," a voice called. Male. Young. Not local. Friendly folk looking to warm up. Lauren moved to the side of the window and peered through a crack in the curtain. 4 men stood outside. Horses behind them, steaming with sweat, suggested hard riding. The lead man had a pale beard and a long brown coat stained with snowmelt. The others wore mismatched gear, trail-worn hats, army surplus, coats looted or bought on the cheap. Guns hung off them like extra limbs. Outlaws. The second knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a boot against the frame. "We know you're in there," the leader shouted, grin too wide. "Saw your smoke an hour back. Don't mean trouble, long as you got room for friends." Boone growled low in his throat. Lauren set his rifle barrel against the window frame. "You already brought trouble," he muttered. Then louder, "Keep walking." Ain't nothing for you here. A pause. Then laughter. I heard that voice before. One of them said, ain't he the cripple from the ridge? Heard he holed up in that shack with a mutt and a busted leg. Funny, another added. Didn't hear about no squaw and kid, but tracks lead here. Lauren's eyes narrowed. They'd followed Ayoka's trail. Inside the back room, she pressed Tayan close. He was awake now, eyes wide with silent fear. Shoo, she whispered. We're ghosts now. We don't breathe loud. We don't move. He nodded, small and solemn. Outside, the gang spread into a loose semicircle. One man wandered toward the barn. Another disappeared behind the cabin. They're probing, Lauren said, mostly to himself. Boone was already gone, slinking through the side door, silent as shadow. The leader's voice rang again. Now listen, old man. We're talking what we want, whether you give it or not. But if you open the door and play nice, we won't burn your place down. Lauren let the silence answer him. Then he fired once, clean through the man's thigh. The outlaw screamed, dropped into the snow, and the others ducked behind cover. Gunfire exploded in return, bullets shattering the front windows, splinters raining across the cabin floor. Lauren dropped low, reloading with practiced hands. His face betrayed nothing, no fear, only focus. Ayoka watched from the darkened doorway, Tayan behind her. She gripped her father's knife, but her eyes were on Lauren. The way he moved, the way he fired again, and another man dropped, this time with a hole in his shoulder. Not a rancher. Not only. She had seen soldiers before, bluecoats, patrols, men who moved like wolves in packs. But this man moved like one who hunted alone. Outside, the remaining men returned fire. One ran toward the barn. A scream followed, then silence. Boone. Lauren smirked grimly. That's one dog you don't sneak past. Another outlaw kicked in the rear door. Lauren swung the rifle around too late, but a blur of motion met the intruder first. Ayoka. She drove the knife into the man's ribs with both hands, twisting as he roared. He flailed backward into the wall, knocking over a shelf, blood spraying across the logs. He reached for his pistol, but Lauren's bullet found him first. The body slumped, twitching once, then stilled. Tayan whimpered softly. Ayoka turned, crouched beside him again, hands shaking but eyes steady. The front door exploded inward, kicked clean off its hinges. The last outlaw rushed in, rifle raised, then froze. Lauren stood with both barrels of the shotgun aimed squarely at his chest. Don't, Lauren said simply. The man hesitated, gaze flicking to the corpses on the floor, to the shadows behind Lauren, to the silent boy watching from the corner. I didn't want this, he said. Lauren nodded. Neither did they. The man dropped his rifle. Lauren didn't shoot him. Instead, he nodded toward the door. Leave. Tell whoever sent you. There's nothing but ghosts and guns up here. And if they come again, I get it. The outlaw fled, boots slipping in blood and snow. Lauren lowered the shotgun slowly. His shoulder sagged a little once the tension passed, but his eyes never softened. He turned toward Ayoka, who was still crouched with Tayan. She stood slowly. You didn't have to let him go, she said. I did, Lauren replied. It's worse that way. Word spreads faster when there's someone to spread it. She understood. Boone trotted in through the broken side door, his coat matted with blood, but none of it his own. He sat beside Lauren with a satisfied grunt. Ayoka glanced down at her hands, streaked in blood, shaking now that it was over. I hadn't killed before. You protected your boy, Lauren said. There's nothing more honest than that. Tayan reached out, gripping her sleeve. She bent, kissed his forehead, and held him tight. The fire still burned in the hearth. The wind outside had died entirely, the storm long spent. But the cabin now felt like a different place, no longer just a shelter from the cold, but something harder, shaped by survival, sealed in blood and ash. Lauren began gathering the bodies, dragging them out through the snow, without ceremony. Ayoka rose to help him, and for the first time, he didn't wave her off. They worked in silence, stacking the dead near the barn, covering them with tarps. The injured one would likely bleed out before reaching the next ridge. Or not. Either way, word would spread. When it was done, they stood outside the cabin, watching the pale sun rise over the hills. It cast long shadows across the snow, lighting the trees in golden fire. "You fought like you'd done it 100 times," she said. "I have." She waited. "I served under Captain Brady at Antietam, then Sheridan in the Shenandoah. Saw the worst of men in blue, gray, and all shades between. I came out west to forget what I'd become." Ayoka nodded slowly. "And did you?" "No," he looked at her. "But now it feels like I remember why I became it in the first place." Tayan stood in the doorway, wrapped in furs, eyes watching both of them like a boy who had seen too much, but lived. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled. Behind them, Boone barked once, short and low. They both turned to look east, where the sky had brightened. But nothing stirred on the trail yet. The wolves had come and been turned away. But winter was not yet over. By the end of the second week, the blood had faded from the snow, and the silence no longer pressed quite so heavy on the land. The bodies were gone, buried in a trench behind the tree line, where the wolves could not find them and the thaw might forget them. Boone circled it once each morning, out of habit, not respect. Lorne never visited it again. Inside the cabin, life returned not with ease, but with stubborn rhythm. Tayan walked now slowly, carefully, bundled in layers of patched wool and furs too big for him. Ayoka carved him a small toy from pine, something her own mother once made for her out of boredom during a winter that tried to kill them both. She never explained it aloud, but Lorne noticed her hands trembling less each day. Lorne fixed the door himself. It didn't hang quite straight anymore, but it closed, and that was enough. Still, something had changed, not just in the walls or the air, but in the way they moved through it. They no longer asked how long they would stay. They rose each morning, gathered water, chopped wood, cooked without speaking unless words were needed. Boone took to sleeping near the boy, his long body curled around the cot like a silent guardian. One night, as the fire burned low and the snow whispered against the shutters, Lorne finally said what had sat in his chest like a stone. "They'll come again." Ayoka didn't flinch. The men, the ones behind them, those riders were hired. Someone with more greed than guts sent him. She stirred the embers with a stick. "You think they'll send more this far into winter?" "Maybe not tomorrow. But come spring, when the pass is open, they'll try." He expected her to look afraid. She didn't. Instead, she said, "Then we stay ready." That surprised him. He watched her, strong now, eyes no longer dim with hunger. She wore her knife openly at her hip, like she wasn't apologizing for needing it. "You could run," he said. "Take the boy east. Find a tribe who'll shelter you. Some still do." She shook her head. "You saw what I had to do to get this far. There's no safety out there, not for him. Only versions of this." Lorne leaned back in his chair, boots to the hearth, steam rising from the tin cup in his hand. "You were never just looking for help." "No," she admitted. "I was looking for a place we could make into something. Not just survive. Live." He nodded once. The old scar on his leg ached. The next day, they began fortifying the ranch. Not a fortress, but no longer just a cabin either. They cut sight lines through the brush and cleared the blind spots near the barn. Lorne showed Tayan how to spot animal tracks, how to tell deer from wolves from something walking upright. The boy never said much, but he learned fast. In the evenings, Ayoka cooked. Not just broth and boiled oats now, but proper stews, wild herbs folded into salted meat. Sometimes she sang quietly while she stirred, not for anyone but herself. The world thawed slowly. By March, patches of brown earth broke through the snow. By April, they were planting a small garden in the back, Lorne muttering about the short growing season while Ayoka smirked behind him. But the shadow of what might come still lingered. And it came, one night, not with guns but with fire. The barn lit first, a low whoosh like breath over dry paper, then flames leaping from the roof like they'd been waiting all winter to dance. Boone barked once, sharp and frantic. Tayan screamed. Lorne was already grabbing the rifle. Ayoka scooped Tayan into her arms, dragging him toward the root cellar. Smoke curled into the cabin. Embers rained down like angry stars. "Go!" Lorne shouted, swinging the door wide. "Cellar." Ayoka disappeared into the dark, Tayan wrapped in her arms. Lorne turned back. He didn't see the man until the fire behind the barn flared, silhouetting him in orange. Same code as before. One of the outlaws. Or maybe the one who'd hired them. "You're a damn pest, McAllister," the man shouted, aiming a pistol toward the house. "Thought maybe cold would finish you, but you're like a goddamned roach." Lorne said nothing. He waited until the man stepped closer. Then he fired once. The shot caught the man high in the chest. He staggered backward, mouth open like he wanted to say something important, then dropped into the snow, his blood steaming in the cold. Lorne stood there a long while, breath coming hard. Then he turned and ran toward the burning barn. Not to save it. There was nothing left to save, but to kill the rest of the fire before it reached the trees. It took until dawn. Ayoka came out with a blanket over her shoulders and a wet cloth for his hands. He sat beside her in the cold dirt, sweat frozen on his neck, soot smeared across his face. Boone limped to him and curled up with a whimper. They watched the barn burn down to ash. "It wasn't just greed," Ayoka said finally. "It was hate." He nodded. "They saw us together. A white man and a Mohawk woman. A boy they don't understand. They wanted to erase it. They failed." The fire crackled once more, then died. Smoke drifted up like a signal, or a promise. Tayan came to the edge of the porch, watching them both. He was barefoot in the frost, but he didn't shiver. Lorne stood. His leg ached more than usual. The barn was gone. The garden likely scorched. They'd lost stores and tools. But not the cabin. Not each other. "You'll rebuild?" she asked. He looked at her, then nodded. "With help." She smiled. Spring came harder that year, but the soil softened. Seeds grew. Tayan learned to shoot a bow, then a rifle. Boone never left his side. Ayoka marked the days by carving them into the doorframe, each line a thread in the life they were weaving. And Lorne watched the horizon every dusk, waiting. But no more men came. Some fires cleanse more than they destroy.